What's good, everybody? Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And yes, tell a friend, tell a colleague, tell a stranger, tell a neighbor. I want to get this out there to as many people as possible. And like always, the J. David Group is sponsoring this episode. Tell as many people about that as well, by the way. My company helps high-growth software companies recruit top software sales leaders and salespeople. Go to the jdavidgroup.com/hiring to learn more, or go to the jdavidgroup.com/looking if you're looking for your next big challenge. My guest today is Michael DiNucci. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at Netradyne, which provides cutting-edge technology to reduce driving incidents for commercial vehicles. And he can explain a little bit more about that in a moment because I'm about to introduce him. Mike, welcome to Over Quota.
Thanks, Jay. I'm really happy to be here.
So unpack that for me. Give us a sense of what Netradyne does, what the value proposition that they're offering to the marketplace. And then also, if you can, walk me through at a high level your own story and career trajectory leading up to becoming the CRO at Netradyne.
Sure. So, as you say, Netradyne is really focused on the world of fleets, commercial fleets. Mm-hmm. We're looking for expanding the category around several types of fleet safety, driver safety, because the idea of putting a dash cam inside of a long haul truck or a delivery van or whatever it might be, that's not particularly new or exciting technology. There have been companies around that have been doing that for a couple of decades, for sure. Police cars have had dash cams for that amount of time. But what Netradyne really seeks to do is add a couple of really unique pieces to kind of not just expand this category, but explode it in a way that has never been done before. We use things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we make the system a vision-based system, which is to say that everything in a legacy type of system like this, you record videos, it gets sent somewhere, whether it's a computer mainframe or whether it's a human review of a bunch of folks sitting around in a room looking through possible risky behaviors, whatever it might be, or an accident that took place, and then send back some type of incident report or insights to a fleet owner or a safety manager or a fleet director. Netradyne seeks to eliminate all of that slowdown. Everything happens on the device. It's what we call edge computing. So how much more powerful would it be to know instantly if you have a driver behind the wheel of a 53-foot, 18-wheel truck that is drowsy because the system's actually reading their eyelids getting heavy, or the head is starting to nod down, or they're looking away, they're not paying attention, they have one hand on the wheel, and the camera sees that their other hand is on their phone and they're looking down and texting. That's a pretty dangerous situation, something that absolutely has to be corrected, not tomorrow, but right now, not at the end of this driver's shift, in this moment before something tragic or catastrophic happens.
And Netradyne
has solved that.
And just really quickly, does Netradyne, so let's say, for instance, if I'm that driver, God forbid, and I'm getting drowsy or my head's starting to look down or my hand is taken off the wheel, what happens in the cockpit, I guess, if you will? Is there a buzzer on my body or something that goes on, or is there
what we call real-time audio alerts? So they will get an audio alert, a human voice will say distracted. It will tell them right away what it's noticed. Mm-hmm. It's going to make a note of all these things. It's going to tag that video. It's going to get sent off to the authorities, or when I say authorities, I mean their superiors at the company, mm-hmm. to make sure that safety manager or the fleet director is informed of this high-risk behavior, hopefully in time for them to do something about it. Now, obviously, things can change in seconds. But we want to try and give as much notice as possible. And again, what makes Netradyne special is not the hardware. We sell a piece of hardware, a couple of different units that you can buy that have 4 cameras for full overlapping fields of view. But we also have just a 2-camera unit that looks out and also inward at the cab. The customer can set it up with, privacy mode. The driver doesn't want the camera on their face at all times, but it's also scanning the horizon always and seeing what else is going on. If somebody runs through a red light and smashes you, or we saw a video where, in a downtown busy setting in Miami, you had a city bus going down the center lane, going 15 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and all of a sudden, a car ahead of them in the right lane gets into the intersection and decides they need to go left. So they pull the craziest maneuver, trying to pull left without a turn signal, without warning, and our poor bus driver T-bones into the side of this vehicle. Now, the driver of that vehicle is not going to get out and say, well, some might get out and take ownership of it, but this particular driver got out, saw that it was a city-owned vehicle, smelled money, and said, well, I didn't do anything wrong. You just T-boned me. I wasn't trying to turn left. I was coming through this intersection. I had the green light. You smashed into the side of me.
Right.
With our technology, it immediately showed that incident exonerated our driver of the bus completely. So in terms of trying to help keep insurance premiums and costs down, it's really an advantage for fleets, and also to be able to coach drivers on behavior to get them improved, so that over the course of their time as an employee or driver of this, whatever the fleet is, whatever the firm is, that they just keep getting better and better. And the way we do that is at the beginning of every day, we give a driver a score of 1,000. They start out their shift with a perfect score of 1,000. And if they speed, run stop signs, go through a red light, following distance too close, hard braking, it's almost like a credit score. It'll drop. But then you can get your points back by doing proper things. How much time have you spent under the speed limit? Great. We're going to have your score go back up. We have a system called driver stars, which is almost like back in kindergarten, you got a gold star on your, if you were quiet for the whole day, you got a little gold star next to your name. We give driver stars that cause that score to go back up. And what we found, something very interesting, but somewhat expected, the fact that you have a score and you're competing against your fellow drivers, it becomes something that those drivers are very interested in gamifying.
Yes.
Trying to compete to make sure I want to be at the top. I don't want to be in the bottom third. I want to be up in the top, and so it's really, I take no credit for it because it's all our engineers, the really smart people in the company that came up with this solution. But they've done a really beautiful job of taking what was a fairly entrenched industry or segment or category, and really thinking about expanding that category in a really meaningful, amazing way.
So let's talk a little bit about how you got there, because one of the things that you and I talked about before we came on is that, as I speak with sales candidates on a regular basis, there are a lot of candidates that are, trying to figure out how to grow in their careers, how to move from individual contributor to manager, from manager to director, and so forth, or maybe even from, mid-market to enterprise, or BDR to mid-market. And I wanted to tap into your experience a little bit to get a sense of where you come from, and then some of the decisions that you've made, but then also some of the challenges that you've had along the way, and how, what advice you have for other people. So let's just start at a high level. Just talk to me about, I noticed just in looking at your LinkedIn profile, it seems like you got into management really earlier in your career, where it seems like it takes a lot of people a long time, if maybe even forever, to get there. So tell me about that, when you were an individual contributor, and how you first got your first management job.
Sure. So I'm a big believer in planning your career out and taking ownership of it, being the CEO of your own career. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan of waiting to get tapped on the shoulder. Hey, I think it's time for you to take that next role. You need to take a really active interest or active role in causing that to happen, driving it forward, speaking it into existence, and then working it into existence. And part of that is you need to make sure that your boss, or the people that are in a position to give you what it is that you want, the next role, the raise, the title, whatever it is, the first part is your boss or bosses need to be aware of that. And if you do it well, if you do it right, they actually have some skin in the game, or they have a vested interest in seeing you succeed. And I'll give you an example of how I've done that a couple times. But I have operated early on in, this was probably high school or college. My mentor in life is my dad, and he has spent his entire professional career in sales and selling, lots of executive positions. He's been the CEO of a couple of companies. He's semi-retired now, and he still runs a couple of companies to just keep himself from getting bored. But I remember him telling me, well, first of all, he taught me how to close at the dinner table when I was 5. And I was the youngest paper boy in the history of California. I got a paper route when I was 4 before I could ride a bike. So I had to pull my papers around in a wagon. And the reason I did that is my dad came to me and said, you can't freeload forever. You got to contribute something to this family. But he did it in a really loving way. He was not a hard driving taskmaster type of parent. So I don't want to give people the wrong idea there, but he taught me at the dinner table, before I was in kindergarten, the difference between a trial close, a direct close, an envelope close, a puppy dog close, and a Ben Franklin close, right? And so that was kind of fun. What I'm about to tell you next should never have happened, because I should have been fairly well prepared for my career in sales, or at least I thought I was. But right after college, I kind of bounced around a little bit. I waited some tables. I lived in Silicon Valley. Right now, I live right in the middle of Silicon Valley and have my entire career. But when I graduated from UCLA, and it's great that I did, because I could never get in there now. It's always nice to know that a school that is probably not ever going to accept you at this point, but it doesn't matter because you got your degree from there. It was still UCLA back then. And so I didn't really want to look in the world of high-tech sales when I was in my early 20s. And I almost was kind of avoiding that long shadow. I felt like my dad had cast this pretty long shadow for me in Silicon Valley, and I didn't want to find out whether or not, could I not live up to that or not. But eventually I did try. And I went to a company called Silicon Graphics, SGI, which was pretty hot in the mid-90s. This was 1995. And as a telesales rep. And, wearing the headset, 80 dials a day, sit there and just try and find people to buy visual workstations and servers. And this was back in the days when SGI computing power were the ones that put together all of the CGI for Jurassic Park and Twister and a lot of the animated movies that came out that, looked like no animated movies before. All that high rendering and CGI stuff that wasn't pixelated, that all came out of SGI's sort of technology. So I was excited to work there. When I got the interview, I went in and I sat down with the hiring manager, and I showed him my resume, which obviously didn't have anything on it. It had lots of bartending and waiting jobs. And then for a year after college, I had bought this small coffee place in my hometown and thought I was going to turn it into a chain of Starbucks, right? It's going to be called DiNucci's. It's a good name. It's not a bad name for, you're going to sell lattes and cappuccinos and gelato ice cream. And so I did that for a while. And not only was I miserable, I was pretty bad at it. And my girlfriend, fiance at the time, said, I think she said it with love, I think. She said, honey, I don't think this is your path in life. I don't think this is your true calling or your vocation. Selling, I think it might be the only marketable skill you have. And I said, thanks, ? Definitely a big question mark at the end, like, thank you, I think. And so I decided to go and try it out. Okay, yeah, so you're Mario Andretti's kid. Does that mean you're never going to step into a race car your whole life? You got to at least find out.
Right.
And I'm a big believer, Jay, that most people don't choose sales as a career. Sales chooses you in almost all cases. There's not many people that majored in selling or got a degree in sales. because in most universities, those types of disciplines don't have degree options. So I myself was an English literature major with a emphasis on romantic poetry. Great. What was that going to be? I could become a poetry professor. Fantastic. But I ended up in sales. Why? Because sales chose me. What I found out was there weren't very many other things that I was going to be successful at. So I went into this interview and I had my completely, ridiculous resume that everything was written in like 32-point font to make it look like there was more there. And this, I had gotten this interview through a connection. So my dad was able to, he knew some people at this company. So otherwise, I never would have even gotten in for an interview. And this hiring manager sat me down, he looked at the interview, and I could tell, like, just the amount of time that he took and the eyebrows raising, like, what am I doing talking to this kid? Like, this is just, and he looked up at me and he said, so your experience is a little light. He said, normally when we hire people for jobs like this, they've either got some selling experience, but it's not high tech, or they have some high tech experience, but it's not selling. Unfortunately, you have neither. So I'm not really sure where we would put you. And I knew at that moment, there are a few moments in life when you recognize when they're happening, this is an inflection point. And I knew that the interview at that moment was over. It might go on for another 30 minutes out of politeness, but it was over. In his mind, mentally, he had flipped the switch off on me. So I figured I had nothing to lose here. So I decided to go on a shock and awe campaign. So I said to him, listen, you're right. I don't have a whole lot of experience, but what you don't know is you're talking to one of the world's best and most natural salespeople. You put me in that chair, I promise you, I'm going to blow you away. And he looked at me with kind of a look of bemusement and puzzlement because he knew I was BSing him and I knew I was BSing him. And he said, oh, so you're the best salesperson I've ever seen. Okay. He said, I'm not looking for people that are going to be 110, 115% of quota. I want people that are going to be 150% of quota. And there was a big leaderboard on his whiteboard, his wall, that listed everybody. All of his reps ranked from 1 to 88. And the top one, sure enough, was like 151% of quota. And so I looked over at him and I said, well, then you definitely don't want me, because I'm not going to be 150% of quota. I'm going to be 250% of quota. I said, you see these names up here? And I started reading the top 3 names. I said, I'll bury them. You give me 30 days, you're not even going to remember these people's names. And, I figured, again, shock and awe. And he said to me, well, that's a really stupid thing to say. You're insulting really talented people that you don't even know. They're strangers to you, and I'm telling you, they're good. I said, I'm sorry. I don't mean to insult anybody. I'm just trying to get your attention. I want you to look past the cover. My resume is nothing but the cover of the book. You can't tell much. What's that old saying, right? Can we open the book and go in a little deeper? He's like, okay, fine. So-and-so that got you this interview is a friend of mine. I'll give you the courtesy. He said, let me ask you this question. When you first talk to a prospect, what are the 5 things that you want to find out every single time? And I thought hard about this, and I started to sweat. And I said, phone number, maybe email address. And the guy looks at me, he said, see, this is how I know you're full of it. Although he didn't say full of it. He said, this is how I know that you're full of it. He said, the best salesperson in the world would be able to rattle off in about 5 seconds. Oh, okay. You need needs, time frame, budget, decision maker, and next steps. And I was hoping you'd get 3 or 4 of them. You got 0. So tell me how you're any good at all. And so at that point, I realized, okay, Mike, you have really stepped in it. You've really caused yourself some major embarrassment. So as a last resort, what I said to him was, listen, I really am smart. I learn fast. I need a chance. I want to get into high-tech sales. So how about this? How about if I work for you as a contractor for 30 days? and you can pay me minimum wage. At the end of that contract, either you see enough that, we keep going, or we just, part as friends because the 30-day contract is up. He said, "You'd really do that?" And I said, I'll kill myself to get into this and get a chance. And so he said, "Well, I don't want to do that with the contract, but here," and he puts a stack of brochures and data sheets and technical gobbledygook on the desk and says, "Take this home, come back in a month, and give me a professional sales call. And if you can do that, then we can move forward." And I did that, and I ended up getting the job. And I was right. A year later, I was the number one person on that board, and I was 262% of quota, rep of the year. And that's why I really feel like sales, in a way, chooses you more than you choose it. And as a final thought on that sort of anecdote, that manager who I worked with for a couple of years and then ended up working for at another company that he founded about 10 years later for a couple of years, he gave me the 6 most important words I've ever gotten in my career, which is, he said, "This is how I have managed my whole career. Once I heard them, I now manage my career all the way from telesales rep to C-level executive using these same 6 words. Those 6 words are: appreciate your position, plan your promotion." So do the job that they hired you to do. Don't try and do other jobs. And appreciate it. Be grateful, but really kick butt in that job. Do an excellent, world-class job in the job that they hired you to do. But always be thinking about what your next move is on the game board. Do you want to move there, up, sideways, diagonally? Not only do you plan your promotion, make sure that your boss knows what your plan is. And I have other examples of how this has worked out beautifully for me as I saw my career really kind of take shape in the second half of 25 years. If the first 10 years were kind of growing, the second 10 years were kind of seeing it blossom into an executive level role, and the last 5 have really been taking off vertically in a way that it's hard even for me to measure or to think about. I've used those same 6 words: appreciate your position, plan your promotion.
Appreciate your position, plan your promotion. I absolutely love that. That's fantastic. Let me, couple of follow-up questions to that, which is, if someone were to sit across from you right now with basically the same kind of resume, and took the approach that you took to get into that particular technology company, how would you receive it? Would you be receptive? And do you, and maybe you would, just given your own individual experience, but do you recommend that approach to others? Because I, as a headhunter, just had a similar conversation with a candidate that I knew that there was no, I was just told by my client that they were not going to accept people that were coming from essentially a reseller, is what it was. He wanted people that were only from vendors. Had all the soft skills. I really liked him, but at the end of the day, what was he going to do? What's your advice about that?
So I am in that position a lot. I feel like I spend half of my life interviewing people. I've got 2 more later today. I had probably a dozen interviews already this week. So I do a lot of interviewing. And sometimes you see resumes that don't look like much. Certainly mine didn't look like anything way back in those days. So I guess for me, Jay, I do try and take pride in looking for talent in places that maybe you might not think to look for them. So that's number 1. Number 2, I do believe that it's smarter to hire talent over experience. So if you've got a young person who's only a year or 2 out of college, or they're only 3 or 4 years into their selling career, I might pivot towards hiring them over a much more experienced person for an RSM role, for example, because I recognize the hunger, I recognize the work ethic, the fire. And so at the end of the day, if I was presented with a resume like my own, where there was nothing on it but waiter, bartender, and work the counter at his own coffee place, I think what I probably would do is I would say, I would give them some sort of a quiz to see, what do you know about this company? What do you know about sales? Very similar to this guy, Chris, that I was talking about. Let me close my door, the dogs.
No worries.
I think what I would likely do is I would put them through the paces a little bit. But at that point, what I would want to go off of is I would try and measure three things that have nothing to do with sales experience. One is energy. How's their energy right now? Is it positive? Are they coming through the screen on Zoom? Are they coming through the phone? Just, they're positive, they're upbeat. How good, how strong is their energy? What about their intellect? How does their mind seem? Is it springy? Does it jump to places that clearly, are they able to grasp concepts? How smart are they? What topics can they speak intelligently about? And then third, I would say empathy. To me, empathy might be a weird sort of thing to think about, but in my world and in what I've tried to really cultivate is a sense of empathy and maybe you might call that curiosity as well. But empathy, that means that a good salesperson knows how to feel what their customers feel. And so getting inside that prospect's skin, they know just how to sell a product or service because they're feeling what the customer feels. So if I get a really great sense of energy, intellect, and empathy from a candidate, then to me, that can help to at least bridge some of that gap. If there's an experience gap, or maybe there's been an employment gap, I look at those kinds of traits very heavily.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned empathy, by the way. That comes up a lot, which is extremely interesting to me. I'm seeing it more and more and more. And the reason I say it's interesting to me is that the more I do these interviews, I've been trying to come up with a word cloud of certain aspects and traits and soft skills that continually come up from CROs and sales leaders, and empathy is certainly, and curiosity, by the way, are certainly starting to lead the way for sure. If there were a horse race, those would definitely be neck and neck, I think, at this point. How does one upskill those things then, right? In other words, let's say, for instance, someone lacks energy. They might be intellectual, they might have intelligence, but they don't necessarily convey it in a first meeting, maybe because they're nervous or who knows. How does, and let's say, for instance, if one is empathetic, how should, especially that one, how should that manifest itself in an interview or when they're talking to you? How should it manifest itself? I get curiosity because they can ask questions. I get intellectual because, like you said, they can follow concepts and have maybe a deep knowledge about something in particular that might not be specific to your, whatever it is that you're selling in your technology, but that can certainly come up. But how can someone show empathy during an initial call? And then also, again, just more broadly, how do you suggest people go and get these really soft skills? They're not necessarily experience, but they're soft skills. Where did you learn, I guess, your soft skills, and where should others go? How should others go about acquiring theirs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there was a school of thought for a long time that empathy in particular was inborn, not something that you could develop or be taught. But there have been a number of studies, particularly around the medical field, so for doctors and nurses, who maybe they started off very empathetic, but they it gets dulled over the years where you become desensitized a lot. Not all doctors and nurses, but it can happen if you work, for years and years in a situation where you're faced with, suffering or people at the end of their life, and that is your job. It is natural to have a little bit of the edges of your empathy kind of sanded off, I guess is what I would say. So, I mean, that ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, it's really powerful. in sales. And you're asking me, I think you're asking me, can it be taught, right? If they don't seem to have it, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and again, maybe whether it's empathy, just even to, and I think on a certain level, we all have these things. It's just a matter of, I feel like, how do you convey your, like I said, energy is easy to teach, I think, right? In other words, I tell people, especially if it's on a phone screen or something like that, to stand up while you're talking if I feel like they have low energy,
Yeah.
right? Like you can teach, you can coach that into somebody. But I guess even more broadly, you have acquired over the years, right? And maybe it was by the time you were 6, given the story that you told about the newspaper and your father. But people, we as individuals and humans and salespeople acquire these skills over a certain period of time. We're not necessarily coming out of the womb with some of these things, right? But eventually we learn how to do it, and I think even more so we learn how to convey how to do it more so, because I think a lot of times we have it already, to your point about empathy. But how can we, where should people go to learn these soft skills, and then how can someone show they are empathic? I've never know what it's empathic or empathetic, but how do they actually show that when they're sitting down and speaking with you for the first time? And who knows, maybe it'll be even later today, when you're interviewing someone on Zoom.
Yeah. So to me, the most powerful thing that you can do to develop that mental muscle is you have to be very, very in tune with your own feelings, your own mindset. So, whether it's just being still, being mindful, some people use meditation, you need to really understand how it is that you personally are feeling. That way you become much more in tune to how the people around you are feeling. And obviously this is greatly beneficial in a role like sales, because if you don't understand very clearly how your customer is feeling and what they are going through, it will be much, much harder for you to sell. Or to state it a different way, customers often want to buy from people that care about them or appear to care about them. Curiosity plays a big role in this. Asking questions and listening more than you speak. That's all part of kind of curiosity and active listening. But empathy specifically is teaching yourself through being in touch with your own feelings. Because a lot of times people will say empathy requires sublimation, burying our own feelings. You have to do that to be an empath or to be empathetic towards somebody else. But I don't believe that, and studies don't show it. Most physicians and psychologists and folks that study empathy they've come to the determination that truly empathetic people are most in touch with themselves first, and then that essentially it finally tunes an antenna that picks up on what the people around you are going through and feeling, and you add curiosity to that, and it becomes an incredibly powerful tool. And obviously, we're not talking about going to a customer and asking them what's going on with their marriage. That's not what we're talking about.
Why not?
Well, you could, I guess, but you want to find out what's happening in their business. What's the thing that's keeping them up at night? What's causing them pain? And you need to uncover a problem or a challenge that they're having so that you can then do your solution alignment. So to me, empathy is one of the best tools in a really high-performing salesperson's tool bag.
Let's go back to that career trajectory when you talk about appreciate your position, plan your promotion, and to share your desire to move up with your manager or someone internally within the organization. Yep. What are the mechanics of that? What does that look like? Is it just as simple as, during one-on-one meetings, I want to remind you, every time we have one meeting, is it like how should one actually go about doing that? an
Yeah,
executable?
it can be that. It can be a lot of different things. It can be writing up a professional development plan for yourself that you sign, and then you ask your manager to sign it. That essentially states an intention. I'm a big believer in those as well. I've done a number of those, and it essentially looks like a resume, really, where at the top you say, I've been here for 2 years. In the next 12 to 24 months, I want to be in a position to get a promotion to the next role. I'm an individual contributor right now. I'd like to be a team leader, or I'm currently a director of sales. I want to be a vice president. I'd like to accomplish that in the next, so it's basically intention stating or goal setting, right? But you sit down and you go through this document with your boss, the person that would be in a position to give you what it is that you're looking to achieve. You have to list, here are my strengths. These are all the areas that I already have that I think make me a really good candidate for this type of job. Right below that, here are the areas that I still need to work on. I'm not strong in this area, this area, this area, but it's not enough to just state what those areas of improvement are. You have to then specifically list, here are the actions I will take to address. So maybe I'm not a good public speaker. Great, I'm going to go to Toastmasters. Or I'm an SDR and I want to become an RSM or an account executive. So I know how to qualify like crazy, but I don't really know how to close. So that's a limitation of mine. I need to figure out how to close. So my action item for myself is I'm going to shadow or do ride-alongs with 5 different reps, the best 5 reps in the group once a month, just to sort of listen to them on closing calls. How do they get the ball over the goal line, or whatever it might be. So you have a professional development plan. You sign it and date it, your boss signs it and date it, and then that's a working document that you can refer back to during one-on-ones and say, how am I doing here? I want to just get a sense for, am I making progress towards my goal? But it can even be simpler than that. I mean, that's a lot of work, and a lot of people aren't willing to kind of go into that level. So what I will also say is I have in terms of career growth, been able to achieve that same aim without going through the specifics or all the machinations of writing a plan and having people sign it. So for example, the last company I was with before Netradyne, I was there for about 11 years. It was a company called ChargePoint, EV charging station company. And I started as employee number 9. I was the first non-engineer that company ever hired. The first person doing any kind of selling, right? And back in those days, and this was in 2008, when I joined, I had a friend of mine recommend the company to me, and he said, you should go check out this company. They make EV charging stations. And I said, oh, cool. What does EV stand for? I don't know what that acronym is. And my friend laughed at me and said, electric vehicles, Mike, what do you think it means? And I said, well, there aren't any electric vehicles. And he said, I know there aren't now, but there will be. In a couple of years, Nissan's going to come out with this electric car called the Leaf. Chevy or some GM brand is rumored to come out with something that has a plug in it. Plus, there's this little company across the bay here in Fremont called Tesla. Rumor is they're going to start shipping a lot of cars yet, but we don't know if that's going to turn into anything. So I went and decided I'm going to take a chance on this company. And I went to the CEO and he said, you'll be our kind of first VP of sales, but you'll also be our first sales rep. You'll also be our first sales operations person, our first marketing person. And I thought, okay, great. I appreciate my position. This is awesome. But I told him, I said, my goal is I want to run the sales team. As this company gets bigger and bigger and the sales team piles up, I want to be sitting on top of that pyramid and have it pile up underneath me. And I'm not necessarily thinking about titles or salaries or anything like that, or what modality it might take, but I want to have that sales engine kind of, pile up or start to take shape underneath me, with me helping to guide the structure of that sales engine. And sure enough, so that was in 2008. In 2012, the CEO and COO came to me, tapped me on the shoulder and said, Mike, I think it's time for you to be VP of sales. You've earned it. And I said, that is so awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. Just so you know, my goal now, I'll plan my next promotion. So I'll wait to hear, what my raise is going to be and how much more stock I'm going to get and which teams I'm going to run. But just so you know, the next rung on the ladder would be Senior VP of Worldwide. That's what I have in my mind. And they kind of laughed. I think they got used to it after a few years, but it's kind of like, wow, this dude, you give him one thing and then he immediately tells you what, you drop off his drink at the table and he's already telling you what he's going to order for dessert. And it's like, can we get through one thing at a time? But sure enough, in 2014, when they promoted me to Senior VP of Worldwide and I had 7 teams, I said, this is so great. I'm going to kill it in this job. And I really appreciate your faith in me. Just so you know, my next role is COO. So I want to move over that one chair to a C-level executive position. My boss at the time was a COO. He was the COO, and he had plans to retire probably in the next 5 years. So I figured I've got at least that amount of time to develop the skills that I need to move over that one chair, to move from a senior VP to a C-level role. So those are just a couple of examples of how I have used appreciate your position, but plan your promotion in my career.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm curious just about what you just said there last, when you talk about looking at the skills that you need to move over to the COO role. We talked a little bit about the soft skills there, but what does that look like with you, I guess, the relationship with your CEO or COO as you're trying to acquire those skills and improve those skills a bit? Is it something that you look at and come up with together and say, okay, here are some of the gaps. Let us show you how to fill these gaps? Or is it that you have to just figure out a way to fill those gaps on your own somehow? And if so, how do you do that? Is it trial and error, or like?
Yeah. So I've seen both, Jay, and a lot of it really just depends on what type of CEO, what type of board of directors you have at that particular company. I've seen a broad range, and some CEOs say, I'm going to leave you alone and let you figure it out, or I trust that you have more experience in this area than I do. And then I've been with CEOs that are extraordinarily hands-on and will tell you, they're not going to say, hey, Mike, we need to get to this place. He's going to say, we need to get to this place, and I'm going to spell out every single route. Oh, here's the A route, the B route, and the C route of how we could get there. Whereas I've had other CEOs that just say, I need you to figure out how we get to $250 million of ARR this year. Go figure it out, right? And so you have to be adaptable, because if to get to a point where you're having to spend your last couple of months each year planning out the AOP for the next, the annual operating plan for the coming year, if you have a very hands-off CEO, you better have some people around you that you can get in a room, bounce off ideas with, and have it become a collaboration. Because I don't have enough faith in myself that I'm going to be able to do that alone. There's not that many people that can do something like that alone. So it just, like I say, it depends very much on the kind of, and it's not just a CEO. If you're a sales rep, your ability to plan your promotion depends very, very much on how open or willing is your boss, the director of sales or your sales VP, whoever you're reporting to. Some of them might take an active interest in having the people that work for them or that are on their team achieve their career goals. Others aren't necessarily as interested. So really just, you kind of have to gauge that or take the temperature of how willing or how interested are those people above you in you achieving your career goals.
What about, I was talking to somebody yesterday who's been a sales director, I don't know, maybe I forget, the last 5 years or so, maybe been with the company for about 15 years, and now wants a bigger position, right? Like vice president of sales. And what he was telling me is that there's 2 people that are occupying those seats internally, and he doesn't see a path to get there, which is why he was talking to me, right? And in your case, obviously the COO was retiring, which was, could have been a natural transition for you. But what do you say to people like that have those goals that either, who knows, maybe it's a VP level, or maybe it's just frankly moving into an enterprise sales role, and there's just, the company just structurally there's no room for them there. How do you manage your career as it pertains to looking elsewhere?
I faced that impediment many times. Sometimes you have to move out to move up. And, this happened to me in my last company, for example. So when that COO did finally retire, and this was in 2017, I was faced with a really kind of existential crisis, which is, I want that COO role. I had been senior vice president since 2014. I thought I'd have about 5 years to get myself ready to move over that one chair. And it wasn't 5 years, it was 3 years. So when the COO retired, I sat for a long time with my own thoughts and feelings. And I kicked this around with the people that are in my life that I consider confidants. And I said, I don't think I'm ready. I'd love it if I was, but I just honestly, I think I'm not ready to take on a role like that. Although, here's the thing. That company called ChargePoint was in its final run-up, its final stage before wanting to go public. And so as badly as I wanted to be the C-level business executive in that company as it goes public and have it go out, because I think that it would be great for me. The experience would be fantastic. It's definitely a trophy that you could put on your resume. I also knew that I had never done a job that big or even remotely that big before, trying to take on a much, much larger role in the company. And it wasn't just about me. It was about the hundreds of people who also work there, who were responsible for many hundreds more people in their own families that were counting on this turning out to be a big exit, a big, a bubbly, effervescent, explosive, either IPO or acquisition. So it's funny, on my wedding, which was in November of 2017, I remember this, at my wedding, I took aside the CEO and one of the board members who also happened to be there, who I considered a friend, and invited he and his wife to my wedding. And I had been thinking about this for weeks leading up to the wedding, that I just, I knew that they were going to start interviewing for that role. And so I took them aside at the bar at my wedding. I'm in tuxedo, they're all dressed up. And I said, guys, I've thought about this. I'm not going to announce myself as a candidate for this role. And at first they said, are you sure you want to talk about this here? Like this venue? Seriously? I said, I don't see you both in the same room except when we're at board meetings. So I thought I would just seize the opportunity. I saw the CEO every day, but I didn't see this influential board member who happened to own more of the stock than any individual, including the founders. He was a major investor. And I knew that the idea of who they were going to replace this retiring COO with was an important topic for them. And I think a lot of people were looking at me as, well, is he going to stand up and throw his hat in the ring or not? And, I'm not normally this self-aware, Jay. I really am not. Like the amount of introspection that it took for me to look at this and say, do I want this? Yes. But am I ready for it? I don't know. And if I fail, not only does it probably spell the end of my time at this company, but it also significantly, materially will harm the ability of this company to reach its potential, whether it's an IPO or valuation or whatever. And so it was really a hard thing for me to face, the fact that I don't know that you're, early on, 15 years before, it would have been full steam ahead. I wouldn't even have stopped, think about it, nothing. It would have been, no, give me the next, I want the next promotion. I want the next promotion. When I told them that, they both seemed very surprised. Like, they went from, are you sure you want to talk about this at your wedding, to, are you sure you don't want to announce yourself as a candidate for that job? Because we expected that you would. And I didn't. I said, no, here's the thing. Last thought. I told them both. I said, the person that you need for this job they don't work here. There's nobody in the company. You need to go out and you need to find a CFO and a COO, both of whom have taken companies out before. It's critical that you find that. That skill set doesn't exist inside this company right now, which means you have to look outside. But as a final caveat, guys, if you decide to interview internally, I am the only one that I think has a chance to be able to do that. There might be one or two other guys that have some pedigree here, but I really believe that, you know, it shouldn't be an internal candidate. It should be an external candidate. If you do want to look internal, then my hat is definitely going to be thrown in the ring. And that was a painful realization for me. It was really the first time in my career that I realized, Mike, it's not going to be nothing but an upward, unbroken, progressive journey straight up the corporate ladder. Sometimes you're going to have to take sharp left turns or right turns. And I'm a big believer in the aphorism or the axiom of sometimes the best part of your vacation is the wrong turn that you take. And I didn't seek out ChargePoint for 11 years. I took a wrong turn. Somebody told me about EVs. I ended up there. It was fantastic, and my career flourished. And I ended up as a senior vice president. But in the end, in the final accounting, by the time 2020 rolled around and ChargePoint was basically at the goal line for an IPO, and as a matter of fact, they just announced last month at the end of September that they're getting ready for a $2.4 billion IPO by the end of this year. So that's thrilling, and I'm so excited, was excited to be a part of it. I'm excited for my friends that are still there. Mm-hmm. But I knew that by the end of 2019, that it was time for me to look for that next role, that next role was a C-level role, and I wasn't going to get it at ChargePoint because they had now filled all those positions with outside people. Nobody told me I had to leave. In fact, the sense that I got from most people was they'd prefer that I stay. I had been there for a long time, and they liked the company better with me in it than me leaving it. But I also knew that, you know, I had to sort of ask myself what I wanted, and what I wanted was continue to move forward and progress in my career. And that C-level role was really calling for me. And then that's when I found Netradyne at the end of last year, joined Netradyne in January of 2020 as Chief Revenue Officer. And when I started, bring it all full circle, Jay, in my first week, I told the CEO, this is really exciting. I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm going to kill it for you. Just so you know, my next role will be COO. And
that's fantastic. I love it. I love it. that is great. Yeah, that that does bring it full circle, for sure. Speaking of full circle, one other thing that I want to mention about that is, you know, as you were sitting there deciding and evaluating your own self and your capabilities and what the company really needed in the COO role, it reminded me of what you were saying about empathy and how, you know, good candidates and good salespeople are, you know, they have empathy. They're empathetic. And the first thing you have to do is think about yourself and how you're feeling. And, you know, that's what you did, I think, in this role too, is that you took inventory of yourself, your skill, how you felt, right? Because I think that was a big part of it in terms of, you know, how it would make other people's lives, how it would affect other people's lives that you were ultimately responsible for leading. And so you looked at the company and realized that it needed somebody else, right? And I think that's the hallmark of what empathy is and what a good salesperson has, which is that empathy. So I think that is just absolutely fascinating because it just manifested itself in that decision making there. Okay. We're going to come to the part of the interview that I call the rapid fire 5. I don't know if I had told you this before, Mike, but okay, good. So I've got 5 questions to ask you. Just answer whatever comes to mind, and then we'll close it out. So what are you most excited about right now, either personally or professionally, or both for that matter?
Well, so I would say that professionally, I'm really excited about the opportunity I have right now to take a very small company that I've joined here and to try and turn it into something big. I feel like I helped to do that at my last job. It's one of the things that's most exciting about me, most exciting to me, I should say, which is taking something that's fairly small or in a gestational stage and then helping be part of the growth pattern and, kind of develop the sales engine. And that's really what I'm focused 100% of my time on right now.
Fantastic. What activity do you miss that you used to do before this whole crazy pandemic came into place that you'd love to do when someday it's all over?
Going to the gym. Physical fitness has always been something that I've struggled with. I try and make it as much of a part of my life as I possibly can. And what I've learned over the last, since I've been an adult, the idea of going out and, I have really bad knees from like high school injuries. Both of my knees have been operated on. So running, going on hikes, a lot of that stuff is really hard. But the idea of going to a gym, spending 90 minutes or 2 hours, half the time, you're lifting all the weights that you can, and, chest and tries on day 1, back and bis on day 2, legs and shoulders on day 3. And then you always finish up with, 45 minutes or so of really intense cardio. For me, that's a recumbent bike, so it's low impact on my knees. I have not been inside of a gym since January 18th. And I don't know when I would feel safe going back to a gym. So for me, that's been the one thing that's always been successful. And I understand that, okay, great, we'll get some stuff, work out at home. I got myself a bike, and I try and, get my cardio in that way. But for me, that's the one activity that I miss the most since we began to shelter in place. That, and I guess I would say going to a movie theater. I love settling into a big cushy seat with the ones that now,
Yes.
Tilt up, and the lights are about to go down, and you're in for either a good nap if you're that kind of person, or just get taken away into a really fantastic story, and love that. And I haven't been to a movie theater this entire year either, and I don't know when I'll feel safe going back to one of those. I know some are starting to reopen, but those are a couple of activities that I really miss.
Yeah, absolutely. I can certainly appreciate that. I also can appreciate that you and I have, sounds to me like we have the same weightlifting days too, the same body parts on the same days, which I think is interesting. Chest and tries, back and bis, leg and shoulders.
Yeah. And alternate every other day, alternate calves and abs.
That's right. I think I've been doing that same workout since I was about 12. Let's see. Well, maybe this goes into what you were just saying, but maybe not. What do you want to get better at right now?
Well, right now, I want to get better at sort of helping my team, motivate my team. I have a large team now at Netradyne across 7 or 8 different groups, and I very rarely, if ever, get to be in the same room with them. So a lot of it is over Zoom or over phone calls, and it's hard. I've had to try and make connections with people remotely, and that's difficult. But my true philosophy around sales management is that their time, the time of my reps and my managers and my SDRs, their time is much more valuable than my time. I'm a support tool for them. I want to try and clear away any distractions, any non-selling issues. That to me is sort of the hallmark of a good sales manager, and that's what I'm trying to become. I want to become a good sales manager by the time my career is over, and it's really difficult to do that in a COVID/Zoom world. So when I have my twice monthly staff meetings with everybody on my team, in companies past, I would have those in one large conference room, and we were all together, and I could, see their faces, read body language. I could hear them if they, laughed at something that I said, trying to be funny, and I wanted to elicit that reaction. It's very difficult to establish that kind of a human connection on Zoom. So that's something that I struggle with during this. It's something that I really want to try and get better at, is how do I become that effective, empathetic manager when I'm not physically in the same space as the people that I'm working with.
I feel like we could go another half hour, 45 minutes on one of the things you just said there about becoming a good manager, because I want to get into your head about that. That's interesting to hear you say, just given all of the experience you have and all the success that you have.
You know what's funny, Jay, about what you just said?
What's that?
I spent a lot of time last night writing down ideas and things like tips. Here's how to handle this sales situation. Here are 7 great sales closes. Here's 8 buying signals from customers. Here's 11 different tips for negotiation. We haven't gotten to a single one of them, so we might need part 2. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. I think,
Your podcast. So if you want me to, if you think that the reaction is good enough, and I'll be happy to come back and kind of rip the foil off of another yogurt here and keep digging.
Yes, for sure. I think we should do another part 2, and it should be tactical, the tactical management aspect of sales as opposed to managing your career aspect of sales. But I think my audience needed, just given the recent conversations that I've had offline, that my audience needed this for sure. But yeah, you're right. We need to come back and do that one, because again, that's a whole nother episode.
I'm ready.
For sure.
All right. We could put it in the bank, and then you could just put it out whenever.
There you go. All right. Fantastic. And then number 4, for those who are keeping track, what keeps you motivated?
For me, I like to think of myself as being part of an organization. I'll summarize this in 3 words. If my career advice could be summarized in 6 words, I would say what keeps me motivated, I could cut that in half. Innovation that disrupts. Actually, I could cut that to 2 words, disruptive innovation. But innovation that disrupts, what that means to me is I don't want to work for an old school, traditional type of technology or type of industry, right? If I worked in banking or insurance, those are tried and true categories that, they have ways of doing things that they're time tested, man. And, the ability to come in and disrupt or shake things up, it's not even necessarily welcomed. But I want to be in a place, my last 11 years before I joined Netradyne was about disrupting transportation, getting away from fossil fuels and getting on to electric vehicles. And I believe that switch is happening. It's going to take a while. But it's underway, and I don't think anything's going to be able to stop it. So now I've moved away from just electric transportation, and I'm focusing on the world of fleets and fleet safety. And so what motivates me is trying to turn the company that I'm with, which is in a crowded space with a lot of noise in it, into the clear leader in this space, the de facto winner in this space. That's really what motivates me. And the way that you do that is you have to have 2 things. 1, technology that changes people's lives for the better. And 2, that innovation, whatever it is, has to disrupt from the bottom or from the side the comfortable status quo of whatever it is that you're trying to disrupt. So for example, we all know that Uber disrupted the taxi cab industry. That disruption, it's rarely comfortable. Some people might say, yeah, but there's as much bad as good, possibly, but there's a reason why it took off in the way that it did. Airbnb disrupted the hospitality industry. Amazon disrupted every industry.
Right.
First they started with books and then toys, and now it's like, all right, bookstores are out of business, the toy stores are going out of business. Is that good or bad? That's a discussion for a totally different podcast. The fact of the matter is they disrupted an entrenched couple of industries, and look at what has happened now. The cell phone industry disrupted the payphone and pager industry, and then finally Netflix totally disrupted DVDs, video rental, Blockbuster. I mean, you're younger than me, Jay, but I'm sure you remember going to a Blockbuster and trying to race to the new release wall in the back to see if there's anyone and those were video cassettes before DVDs. Netflix has completely exploded that entire paradigm. So one piece of advice or something that keeps me motivated or excited is I always want to feel like I'm on the cusp of rooting out something that is deeply rooted and shredding it apart disrupting it, exploding it.
Fantastic. I love it. Yeah, that stuff just gets me excited when you talk about disruptive innovation and how industries get disrupted. It's exciting. And the last question is, what's the best way for people to connect with you and say thank you, follow up, the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with folks. Please be sure to tell me that you heard me on Overquota so that I know where you heard this or where you were connected with me. But my LinkedIn profile is just linkedin.com/in/Mike DiNucci. And the spelling of my name, I'm sure, will be in the podcast description. You also could connect with me on Instagram or Facebook. Both of the names are just Mike DiNucci, and would love to connect with folks. And really, Jay, I have such a good time talking to you. And you know, we've been on now for, you know, longer than we expected, but it went by so quickly in my mind. You're probably thinking, God, this guy.
Not at all.
But yeah, I would love to do a follow-up on this and really dive deep into some of the methodologies and some of the tried and true sort of sales techniques that have carried me through, you know, a 25-year sales career that I'm very, very proud of.
Yeah, we absolutely are going to do that. As a matter of fact, we'll just schedule it right after we finish recording this. In the meantime, I'll say, Mike DiNucci, thank you for disrupting Overquota in the best way possible. And goodbye, everybody. Cue in the music.